I tried to stay with that pattern and find as many places as I could that set up right. And the game plan was to just hit as many stumps as I could throughout the day versus trying to see a fish on a stump and try to make him bite. Was that right or wrong? I don't know.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank. Hold the line. Hey, you know we on the way. All the time. Yeah, we do this every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans, we are back with another episode of Take It to the Bank podcast. Promise you we can give you some awesome information about catching fish. Today I've got Tennessee River Hammer, Mr. Brent Anderson, BA. The reason his nickname is BA is not because that's his initials. It's because he is a certified badass on the Tennessee River everywhere he goes. We're going to talk to him a little bit about Tennessee River today. Later on this year, we're going to get some knowledge off of him when he starts guiding at Lake or you got some on Champlain or just St. Lawrence?
Mainly St. Lawrence. I've done a trip or two on Champlain.
So he's traveled around all over, guided in Florida for a long time, does some stuff on Highland reservoirs up around Dale Holla. Has been a guide for a long time. He and I have known each other probably 20 years.
Yeah.
We're kind of dating ourselves here, but
we were 12 when we met.
We were. I was legit like 19 or 20. So Brent and I's here local. Again, live right here in Middle Tennessee. So let's get into talking about some juice on the Tennessee River. We're going to talk about the month of March. The month of March. So right now, Kentucky Lake is coming back. Everything's, looking up on the Tennessee River. Just got out of the Toyota at Pickwick, and the guys that caught them smashed them. Yeah. Looked like Florida weights.
It did. Unfortunately, I was not one of those guys, but
so the cool thing about Brent is he is human. So
yes, I spend a lot of time in reality check.
Well, let's dive right into it. Obviously, everybody knows, the Tennessee River is a completely different deal than everything else. Right. They act different, they set up different, the structure is different than everywhere else you go in the country. And it's really famous for its ledge fishing in the summer.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about how to catch them in the spring. Fishing's just phenomenal. It's not like they just show up in the summer. Can be really, really good. So when you're talking about the Tennessee River, we're talking about Kentucky Lake, Pickwick, Wilson, Wheeler, Guntersville, Nickajack, Chickamauga, Watts Bar.
And the other one,
Fort Loudon. So a lot of them, exactly. They've had some big tournaments on Fort Loudon a few times. Going to have another big one on in 2026, I think, called Bassmaster Classic. When we're talking about the Tennessee River, how do they lay out as a whole? I am from California. I've never been to the Tennessee River. Tell me what to expect when I get there in March.
Well, the March was always my favorite month to fish Kentucky Lake. I won the majority of my money in the fall.
Mr.
I was pretty obviously knew a lot of the deep stuff in the summer. I never won any. I think I won an ABA weekend series, one June up there, but so many people knew how to do that. Like I would know where a lot of the schools were, but I wouldn't be able to get on them because of other boats. But what I loved about March is I've won tournaments on Kentucky Lake from 0 to 50 foot deep in March, and all of that could be going on at the same time. So it was really diverse, and it allowed a lot of people to spread out, do different things.
Now, most of your experience comes from Kentucky Lake. That's kind of where you're local, but you can, when we make references to Kentucky Lake or we make references to Pickwick, you can use what we're talking about completely across the chain.
Yes, they all fish similarly. Current is a big factor in what makes them do what they do. You know, you have the Guntersville always has grass, so that it's going to change. But for the most part, I've taken what I've learned on Kentucky Lake and been able to, get top tens at Guntersville. I won a BFL here at Pickwick a couple years ago in February. Basically, just taking the basic fish behavior I learned on Kentucky Lake and you know translating that to the other lakes up the system.
Well, you've already answered kind of my first question. When somebody brand new comes into a Tennessee River Lake in March, or any time really for that matter, the number one thing they need to pay attention to is current.
Uh, there's a couple of things you can do to get away from that, like big tributaries. There was one guy had a really good tournament this past week in one of the big creeks down here. So here you got Bear and Yellow Creek. Kentucky Lake, really the only option you got there would be like Big Sandy River.
Maybe Blood River,
Jonathan,
those bigger ones.
You could almost break those down into their own little lake. But the problem is the majority of the fish winter on the main river channel. So I really, as bad as I was struggling to get bites down here last week, I thought about Bear and Yellow, but they're so big, I kind of ran out of time because you break them down totally different. Current is not a big factor in those.
Of course, as you get back in the bays,
right?
The current doesn't reach back there nearly as far.
And I also, I've been following the winter trail this winter. It's taken 30 plus to win everything down here. When I did get a bite last week in practice, it was, I told you one day I had 4 for, 20 pounds, and one day I had like 3 for 15. I mean, they're big ones out there. And I didn't really think that you could catch the size in the creeks. Kentucky Lake was notorious for like everything got won on the main drag of the river. Even when it came to bush flipping season in the spawn, I did not go in a creek unless I told you before we went live. Like if you saw me in a creek, I was struggling because I wanted to win, and that's where the biggest population of fish lives.
So can you win out of creeks, or does a man, I feel like when I go to a brand new lake and know nothing about it, I look for just trying to get rid of water. Like if I can write something off,
right,
and not have to go check it, to me that's as important as finding them. So if you're coming to Kentucky Lake in March or Pickwick in March or wherever, can you write off the big tributaries and kind of use them as a backup if your main lake stuff don't work?
That was kind of how I approached it. Probably the number one key that I learned, and it's happening here right now. A lot of guys may disagree, but the majority of the bait is in the river channel at Pickwick right now. I hadn't been on Kentucky Lake since last spring, but I guarantee it's happening there. And the biggest percentage of the population of bass will be out there with them. The problem I always had was, we're going back to pre-scoping era. I had to have a very certain set of conditions to be able to get those fish to bite. So that was something really hard for me to swallow, is I knew every tournament in February and March where the winning fish were. I just couldn't catch them. What those conditions seemed to be back then were we needed some clear water and slower current, because I'm going to try to do this. They basically would be on the edge of the river and they would sit down the slope. So it'd be really similar to in the summer, they're going to be relating more to the break. And in the winter, they're relating more to the bait down in the bottom of the river channel. So I used to side image and mark the shad, put a waypoint on each end of the shad, and then just go down the shad with an A-rig. And when you got clear enough water, and slow enough current, they will come up and show themselves.
Gotcha.
And
And that was before LiveScope, before forward-facing sonar.
I think I figured that out. Troy Hollowell helped me out with that a lot. One winter he figured it out, probably around 2014 or so.
How has that changed with LiveScope now?
Well, it's going on right now at Pickwick. What I think is happening at Pickwick is there's not a very big population of fish, so you need a pretty good population of fish on those places to be competitive, to come after a bait and let you know they're there. My problem with trying to scope them is there's so many other species down there. I can't pick out the bass. There may be some of these kids that could do it.
Well, it's super intimidating, when you get to a lake like Kentucky Lake, like Pickwick, that have Asian carp, that has drum and catfish, and those fisheries, those bodies of water are so fertile that they just hold a lot of biomass, a lot of different species, and they're everywhere you look. Like it's crazy when you drop your live scope down, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much clutter on my screen, and all of them are fish. And you
Yes.
can do it, Kentucky Lake's 100 and ever how 60 miles long or ever how long it is, and you can do it from one end to the other.
One end to the other. And even back, when we figured that I figured that deal out, or Troy kind of turned me on to it, and then I started playing with it. And you know, that school of shad may run, they may run 3/4 of a mile down the river, and I may catch white bass and drum and catfish down through there, but there would be a spot where they were largemouth and smallmouth. So that's and then you could come back and consistently catch those fish there until the conditions got to where they I couldn't get a bait down to them because of current, or B, the water was too dirty for them to be able to see it and travel distance. So
Okay.
I'd really be interested to see if some of these good scopers could kind of pick them off one at a time.
And amongst all the other trash fish, let's call them.
Right. But so kind of what was there was one ingredient that went along back then. All of these ledges always had stumps on the side of them. So in the summertime on a ledge on the Tennessee River, the fish want to set where the current hits. And in the wintertime, they're going to be on a more straight. And again, I think this is total bait related. I don't think the fish could give a crap. They just
Okay.
want to eat.
Right.
So most of these places I look for will be really close to where you'll find a post spawn summer school. But instead of being, say in a swing in the river, they're going to be on the straighter part of the ledge. And I always believed that part of the ledge had more natural wood on it because current didn't hit it as hard and wash it away over the year.
Okay.
If that
Let's go
makes
ahead and pull that up on a map, and so we can show people, really what we're talking about. Okay. Can you see that okay, Brent?
I can, and you just happen to be on a really good one right there.
So we're on Pickwick. If you see me zoom out here, you can tell this is Pickwick, Yellow Creek. What is that one right there? Indian. So right here's a big bay, one of the more popular kind of community type spots on Pickwick. So you were talking about, now, if you can see my cursor here, current is flowing north, which is kind of the standard on Kentucky Lake and Pickwick, the way those lakes, lay out. Everything's down the river north, which never made a lot of sense to me. But, you were saying that they would get on the kind of a bend in the river where the current hit the hardest, which on a, right out here next to the river, something like that where my cursor is. Does that make sense, Bert?
Yeah, and then kind of where you see the shallower spot where that little blue point where it falls off into that creek channel.
Mm-hmm.
That's a summertime. I mean, I hadn't been down here in the summer in a few years, but they used to get there like and I'm assuming if there's enough fish in here to make a school, they still do. But yes, that's a textbook place where that creek channel enters the river, and then where the current hits that downstream point is where your school would set in the summertime.
Okay. So then you said they're more on straighter, steeper banks now. So if we just go down the river right here, here's a shallower bar,
Yes.
saying it's like 16, 17, on the top in the summer, which probably now would be, 12 or 13, something like that. So this, I feel like everybody looks at creek channel bluffs and channel swings and main river bluffs and stuff like that,
Right.
just because those fish have traditionally, we've looked for verticality. I feel like in the wintertime, that way they can move up, move down, that kind of thing. So you're looking for the exact same thing, except you're looking for it on main river bars
Right.
or
So
creek channel bars.
it's an underwater version of what you fish on other places, basically a flooded bluff wall type of deal. But you can see the contour lines get really tight right there. So that tells me, that's a very sheer drop. And for whatever reason, maybe I'm right in the fact a lot of those straight, steep ledges still have a lot of natural wood on them. But that one right there is loaded with stumps. And then down past those stumps, in the bottom of that river channel, it's full of shad right now.
So out here, even when the river's ripping at, 80, 100, 120,000, those shad are out in the very middle of that river channel in 60 foot of water.
Yeah. You can, there's places on this river right now you can idle from one ledge over to the other, and the entire bottom of the river channel is just bait.
Wow.
And I think that's where a lot of the fish are that, we're all saying there's not many fish in the lake right now. That's mainly because even though you're seeing these 30-pound bags getting caught, these guys are getting 5 or 6 bites a day.
And this is on Pickwick. Kentucky Lake's probably different than that,
Yeah,
just because of the.
Yeah, Kentucky's got a good population right now. So
Okay. So on spots like this, like we're talking about, these straighter bluff walls, underwater bluff walls, if you want to call them that, straighter river ledges that, are close to where they'd be in the summer. Give me 5 baits that a man needs to be throwing, early pre-spawn like this.
well, I used to say it's such a different era now. You kind of got to put an asterisk beside it. But I used to could find every fish I wanted to find on TVA with an Alabama rig, a jerk bait, a football jig, a DT6, and a rattle trap. Maybe a DT10. Something that would crank that, that 5 to 10 range. Obviously, on something like this, some days they would be up on top of that ledge, and you could catch them on a jerk bait, cranking. You catch them on most everything I just named. The way that when we were really able to draw them up, like out of the bottom of the river, was when the A-rig came out, and it was, man, we had some crazy days. But that's really what showed me what was living out there, and that's when it kind of sunk in my head that is where 90% of the population is in the wintertime.
So you still probably need those same baits today. The A-rig is as good a scoping bait, in my opinion, as there is in the wintertime.
Absolutely.
And you don't have to, my favorite thing about it, you don't have to play with them. I mean, you put that thing on 20 or 25 pound line on a big bait caster, you've got one single hook in these fish, or a lot of times, especially a smallmouth or something will get 2 or 3 hooks in them. Yeah, you just reel them in and swing them.
Yeah. But again, back to Pickwick, that deal was playing last week. One thing I think that hurt me, that there's not a ton of fish in the lake, I feel like, and a lot of guys are agreeing on. So you couldn't just go down that stretch and get that competitive instinct for them to come up and show themselves. You basically had to put it on their nose. So obviously the minnow pinion came a player. and also throwing at the individual stump itself versus just trying to pick out fish amongst all that, you know, just trash in the bottom of the river.
So will they get sucked down to the bottom there, or are they up suspended? I'm assuming because of the current, especially current dependent. If they're ripping 200,000 through there, they're not going to be up suspended because they're going to have to swim really hard all the time.
Yeah, and that's where the kind of the scoping aspect of this is new to me. I didn't know if that we had like 15,000 CFS during practice, which is basically
None.
non-existent current. So you could look at the stump and you could see the fish sitting next to it. He might be a foot off the bottom. He might be 2 or 3 foot off the bottom. You could throw in there, and most of the time you could get them to follow. I couldn't always get them to bite, but when I did get a bite, it was a big one. Get to talking to other guys. That's kind of the word on the street is, man, it's hard to get a bite, but they're big. So as far as last week went, I tried to stay with that pattern and find as many places as I could that set up right. And the game plan was to just hit as many stumps as I could throughout the day versus trying to see a fish on a stump and try to make him bite. Was that right or wrong? I don't know. But here's another thing. We got some rain through the system. Current went up to 90,000. That's a big deal, going from 15 to 90. So what I wasn't sure was, I didn't know if those fish would plaster to the bottom or actually make a move, in towards the bank a little bit.
To get out of the most current.
Right. From what I saw on the first day of the tournament, I won't name any names, but I saw some of the guys that clocked them, and they were out there fishing the kind of stuff I was fishing. Just obviously much better at more fishing it, knowing how to get them to bite.
So
that makes
so how long
they stayed out. A lot of them stayed out there.
How long does this stump on bars deal usually play? I mean, obviously through the whole month of March, or by the end of March, are some of these fish kind of wanting to push shallower, and go to thinking about spawning?
Well, I've got 1 year that I actually kind of got to see it play out, and I don't know if every year happens this way, but I started that winter scanning for those shad on that river, down in that riverbed. And all winter it was muddy and high current, and I could not figure out a way to catch them. So the next little pattern we're going to talk about, when March rolled around, the first BFL, I had just beat my head against the wall trying to catch these fish on that straight line river ledge, man, and could not get them to bite. And again, I'm not seeing them. There's so many species down there, but just from experience, I knew they were out there. So there's another pattern we'll get into. I ended up winning the BFL off of my secondary pattern that year. So fast forward the next week, the Music City BFL came to town. Well, my secondary deal kind of died out. So I went to what I feel is kind of the third next best pattern, and where all these fish will eventually end up as the spring progresses. And I finished second in that BFL on a red-eye shad in a foot of water.
Okay.
So now I've got to win the first week of March fishing a DT, in the mid-depth range. The next week, I get a second place throwing a trap in a foot of water, and we'll talk about that also. Then the third week of March, the conditions got right. Current slowed down, water cleared up. The ABA came to town. It was the Middle Tennessee division. And I absolutely ground pounded them suckers on that straight river ledge deal.
Just because the conditions got right there.
Right. So they were still out there, even though, some fish had already started in, but the biggest population was still out there with those shad. And I think, man, I caught probably 150 keepers that day, all on an A rig. I was catching them 2 and 3 at a time. And it was funny because me and David Januko, who I know you know really well. We got a little cocky, man. We thought since it was the Middle Tennessee guys, none of them would really know what to do, and we're gonna run away with this thing. It's a me versus him, and I think I had close to 27, and he had like 25 something.
Wow.
So we're idling in, and he's like, "You got 25?" I was like, "Yep." He's like, "Congratulations, man." Like, we think it's over. We're first and second. Well, two guys tied with 29 pounds that day. One guy I think was from Center Hill, man, had never even been to Kentucky Lake. Another one used to fish the tour, man. I always forget his name. I think he lived on Guntersville, then he moved to Old Hickory. But either way, I got to talking to them, and they were doing the same deal, man. Like, we were all on the river doing that deal, throwing the A rig, and we all smashed them.
So as far as the straight ledge pattern that you're talking about, what are perfect conditions, and then what are some things that if you see it, you get away from it?
I feel like you need a moderate current, which I would say, on Tennessee River is probably 60,000 CFS or below. And for those that aren't familiar, there's a TVA app that you can look at all this.
And when you're fishing on the Tennessee River, you need to be checking that out
You do.
as soon as you get up in the morning, before you go to bed, and 5 times throughout the day.
Yeah. And and then water clarity. Because, I feel like I'm trying to think of the best way without having to scope and put a minnow on their nose, you need them to be willing to come distance for a bait.
Gotcha. Even now, scoping, that's probably still the best conditions that you can get. They can see your minnow farther away.
Yeah, and I know, again, I don't want to call out any names and give away anybody's secrets, but one of our friends was catching them out there pretty good, kind of on the edge of the river, and had a way better first day than I did, but mediocre. And the second day he moved in to more secondary type stuff,
With the
and
current coming up.
yeah, and caught
Gotcha.
a big old stringer.
Okay.
So there is a threshold of current on the TVA that will change them from just laying on the bottom where they're at to actually swimming. That's never to the back of a creek, but they will go closer to the bank where it's just not quite as hard to flow.
So when they move, say you're catching them on the straight stuff, just like you said, the water's clear, where they're pulling 45,000 or something like that. You're figuring out on these straight, river ledges. And then, like you said, we get some rain. They water muddies up. Now they're pulling 90 or 110. So they're going to move from this river ledge to still the same stuff, stumps on bars,
Right.
or whatever's down there, big
Yes.
rocks, rock piles, whatever. And they're just doing it on stuff closer to the bank. They're moving 100 yards, 200 yards.
Yep.
Okay.
Just to move just straight in.
So I think I found a little spot here that we can show everybody. So if you're catching them out here on a straight river bluff, well, not a river bluff, a river ledge that you're talking about, shad's all out here in the middle, and then they move. You're going to, instead of looking here now, you're going to look on this bar right here closest to the bank.
Right.
Still looking, same exact stuff, same bait, same everything. Just those fish are getting out of the current. Okay. What are some other things that people can go look for? Some kind of secondary stuff and that kind of thing. Still early pre-spawn.
Yeah, my second favorite, and I won a couple of tournaments on this pattern in my life. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but if you see that Panther Creek channel coming in there, so you may point that out with your cursor. Just follow
right here.
that channel from the river, and when you get down here where it makes that horseshoe bend up against that bar,
right here. Okay,
I'm gonna start looking. That's gonna be a place that those fish will stage. The ones that have said, "Hey, I'm tired of sitting out here in the mud in the current," or whatever. Those ones that are really ready to get after it. They love to stage in those bends. And the way I always tried to explain this is, if you think, just think about when you're a kid wading a creek that's ankle deep with your, with your little beetle spin, and then that creek makes an outside bend. It's always a deep hole right there, and they usually always had some natural wood left on them. So that's what that looked like 100 years ago before this thing was impounded. So there's usually always a pretty steep drop in those bends, and there's always some natural wood left. And by natural wood I mean stumps, remnants of trees. But I catch a lot of big fish on TBA in that type scenario right there.
All the way back into the creeks, or
I
you still trying to stay from the mouth out to the main river, that kind of thing?
I would never I would kind of draw a line, from point to point over there where you actually enter the bay,
Mhm.
and that would be my cutoff. And I'm not saying, the way I've learned this stuff is fishing a lot, having a lot of hours of not catching anything. And I've caught a random fish in that kind of straight channel. But the dependable, like high percentage place of where they would kind of gang up would be in the bends.
Gotcha.
Um,
Gotcha.
and that's something that I know another friend of ours, that's how he was catching them last week. And he had a great big bag the first day and only caught 2 the second day. But again, it's hard to compare this tournament just because so few bites were being generated by anybody, even the guys that caught them. But that's a pattern I checked on Kentucky Lake last year that still, it still works. It's not always the deal, but it's a thing you consistently catch fish, and if you time it right, it can be the deal.
And I'm sure you're still looking for that spot on the spot. You're looking for stumps or, little depressions or rock piles or whatever that you can find. I mean, you're going to drop your scope and be looking for that stuff and throwing at it,
Right.
or just individual fish, that you can catch.
Yeah,
Same baits there.
that I'd typically that stuff's usually going to be a little shallower. So old school normal fishing, clear water, I always jerk baited that deal, and to try to find them and be able to cover as much water as I could. If there was some stain in the water, I threw the DTs, like a
Mhm.
DT6, DT8, rock crawler, something that's going to hit that 6 to 10 range.
So we deer hunt with David Fritz, right? Little sidebar. And he designed those DT crankbaits for Rapala. And one of, in my opinion, the best crankbaits ever made. We're not sponsored by them. They're just a dang good bait. I've got a
Yeah.
box full of them.
And in cold water, I mean, I don't think you can beat it.
So good.
I catch them I've caught them in the summer. One of my deals in the summer, I used to throw a 6XD and beat them down. And then when, you make a few casts in there and don't catch one, I'd go to the DT16 or DT20 and pick up a few more. And a lot of times it'd be the biggest one of the bunch.
So Fritz, I was talking to him about them, and he's like, well, they say it's called dives too. But the reason it's a DT is because my name is David Thomas Fritz. So DT is for David Thomas. Now, there's you some baits. Okay, so DT jerk bait. Again, obviously still going to throw them in. I think it's one of those things that you really can't get away from right now.
But I will say this: a lot of times once I found those fish jerking or cranking, I would weigh a lot of fish in on a football jig on those places. In fact, the year I figured that out, we were practicing for a BFL, and the water Kentucky Lake was pretty clear for Kentucky Lake that time of year, and I caught him on a jerk bait. It rained that week and got muddied up, and I went through my stuff with my jerk bait and didn't get a bite. I went back through it with a football jig, and I think that was the first time I ever broke 20 pounds and was like disappointed because that was the first week I'd ever caught a 30 bag, man, and I had big teeth marks down to here, and I really thought I was going to blast them.
That is awesome.
But they are definitely sweet spots when you find them, because I came back 4 years later, and that pattern was kind of the deal again. And I won that BFL in 2016, and they were right on the same waypoints from that I had found in 2012.
That's cool.
You definitely want to, if you get bid on a deal like that, you want to make sure you mark it.
Perfect. Okay. Is there anything else? You know, again, what I'm trying to do here is just give some people some general knowledge and some starting places. These are high percentage areas. Anything else that goes on in the month of March that you can look at that's kind of overlooked or something like that?
I don't think anything's overlooked this day and age, but I've probably the most consistent way just to get a bite is I call them gravel washes. They're basically shallow gravel doodads, just like where your perch is sitting, where it says creek bend. Just any little thing that's connected to the bank, but it's still main lake. And there's usually nothing on them. I mean, they're just me and Tristan Abbott were talking about this the other night, and he said, "Man, he's a Highland guy, and he can't wrap his head around throwing it bare gravel." And I'm like, "Dude, Tennessee river fish love bare." Yeah, I don't know how many ledges, like hard bottom natural places, I've seen ruined because a guy wanted to put a bunch of brush piles on it, make it better, and they don't use it anymore. So,
Right.
but that right there is usually just a strictly rattle trap. I have since, become a big lover of chatterbaiting. Did throw it a lot back when I found all this kind of stuff, but they were definitely a chatterbait on that type stuff, and a rattle trap, square bill, stuff like that.
Now, a lot of these things are pretty steep on the end as well. At least some of them that I've found, there's a big gravel point that sticks off, but you get 10 feet off that point and you're in 20 foot of water or something like that. Is that the stuff that you're talking about? Or are you looking for more of the big flatter points?
I kind of like it flatter.
Okay.
You're typically going to catch them right on top of it, kind of the shallowest part of it. But so that's another thing where there are differences as you kind of go up the TVA. Heck, Kentucky Lake's so big, those things in New Johnsonville drop off into 4 feet on the end, and in Paris they drop off into 8, and then down by Moores they drop off into 15. So
right,
but I've caught them on all of them.
Gotcha.
But that to me is kind of that's the last place that all those fish stop at. All these fish that have been out here in the river will eventually cross over these little gravel washes before they start doing their deal.
So when these fish, when they start to spawn, now I know when do these Tennessee River fish try to spawn?
I've always believed that the real big ones did it earlier. I always believed they did it deeper, and I always believed they did it on the main river. And a lot of people never believed that. And that was one thing I finally proved with scope last year on Kentucky Lake. I caught largemouth on the main lake spawning in March in 11 foot of water, and I would have never known if it hadn't been for forward facing sonar.
So by the time you get into the end of March, you can start looking on some of these places that current isn't hitting anymore.
And you might be, I think a lot of people would be surprised how much current may still be hitting it, but they will they will be sitting behind, a stump or a log or something on the bottom out there.
Gotcha.
And the argument to that used to be, guys used to say, they all swim in those pockets to spawn. And in my heyday on Kentucky Lake, when it was in its heyday, I said, man, if every one of those fish swam into a pocket to spawn, you could walk across their backs to the back of the creek and not get your feet wet. And, really none of the TVA is a is really known for sight fishing. So that tells you right there, they're not laying all over shallow banks. But I mean, I think the cat's out of the bag after the invitational at Kentucky Lake last year. There's a lot of spawning going on out in the middle.
For sure. So we've talked about some places, to go. What have you seen? You fished a million of these tournaments, right here on throughout the Tennessee River. If you move back up to, Wilson, Wheeler, Guntersville, I know we're getting a little bit out of your home area, but fish are still acting like this. I mean, with all the grass on Guntersville, does that change it a lot?
I think it just opens some more things up. The closest I ever came to winning a bit, I've never won on Guntersville. I finished second in a ABA championship down there when we used to go to the Classic. Finished second in a BFL. I've always wanted to win there. That was my favorite lake until it got taken over by eelgrass, and I just got so frustrated with that. And I don't even mind the eelgrass growing on the bottom. It's all the eelgrass that's floating
when you can't reel it to your rod.
Yeah, but I basically use this same approach. I just, where on Kentucky Lake and Pickwick, once I leave that main river stretch and go up into the creek channel, instead of just following the channel looking for stumps, I'm just following a grass edge.
Okay.
But
so they're still relating to structure. They're still relating to the bottom the same way. It's just what you're fishing is different when you've got all that eelgrass, the milfoil, the hydrilla. Hydrilla's probably the main one on Chickamauga.
Yeah.
Kind of as you move up the Tennessee River chain.
Yeah. I've made a pile of top tens throwing a rattle trap out there in that snaky ditch between when you leave Goose Pond, and you run the boat lane to the river. There's an actual real snaky ditch, and all of those little horseshoe bends were always the sweet spots. Again, this is 100-year-old information, but the point is they still act the same. We just have to fish different for them now because of Guntersville probably is the one you can still go fish old school and compete though of the majority.
Yeah. So what you were talking about right there, I've got pulled up.
Yeah, that used to be my if I could because I didn't start fishing for a living until 2010. And none of the stuff started, none of our BFLs and stuff started on Kentucky till March. So I'd go every weekend to Guntersville in February and fish. And a lot of times I didn't get to practice. So I'd just go out there and get in that ditch right there. And I'd follow the edge of the grass down one side of it to the river and turn around and go back down the other side. And then over the years, all my waypoints were always in one of those little sharp bends, It was never on like a straight part of it. It was always in bend.
That again, that makes a ton of sense. I feel like it's what people have been doing for years, on Highland reservoirs and other places. They're looking for steeper stuff, channel bends, that kind of thing. It's the exact same thing on Tennessee River. It's just offshore. You're 300 yards from a bank.
Yep.
A lot of times. And you're looking for the exact same stuff. It's just underwater.
Exact same stuff. And the year I finished second to Alex Davis, I went straight across from Goose Pond to that long straight river ledge and sat out there in about 40 and chunked my A-rig down through there. And there was about 7 schools down through there.
That's cool.
And back then I had no idea why they were there. We went back a couple years ago and I was going to try to fish those places, and the eelgrass was matted up right on my waypoints, like not growing, like floating. And I was like, there's something creating an eddy down there, like holding that eelgrass, and that's why they were good, But back then, I was just like, that was one reason I think I was dangerous because I just didn't know anything. I was, dumb enough to go get on a straight river ledge and fish for 12 hours, and I'd find a lot of stuff a lot of people didn't kind of overlook.
So let's talk just a little bit about getting around on these bodies of water. That's always something that I ask or try to figure out when I'm going somewhere new. We've talked a whole lot about stumps.
Right.
And I have left the bottom of a lower unit, the skeg, on a stump in Kentucky Lake before when the water's down. So all these lakes, the winter drawdown is about how many feet?
Well, let's see. So Pickwick is 6 feet, I think. Kentucky's 5 feet. Guntersville doesn't have one.
So it stays pretty.
I think it's got about a foot fluctuation. Chick has one. I hadn't spent a lot of time on Wheeler, but I do know it has a drawdown. I have no idea about Wilson. I'm thinking it may stay. But
So when you're running these lakes, you really need to be careful. I mean, I know Kentucky Lake for sure. You've got to be careful where you're going at winter pool, because you will hit a stump on some of these bars, and you'll be 400 yards from a bank and think you're in, 20 foot of water and you're in 6 inches. So give me some advice on running backwaters and running behind this stuff, and kind of what a man really needs to pay attention to when you're running, your boat wide open.
Well, our mapping's really good now. I mean, pretty much all three versions of it are good on the Tennessee River. When I get up north, man, I have to start swapping brands on some mapping. But if you're new, to the TVA, I would idle. If you're not following buoys, which most secondary channels and stuff are marked. So to be super safe, just stay in the buoys.
Keep her between the navigational beacons.
Yeah, man. R.I.P. Jimmy B, man. If you're gonna try to run shortcuts and stuff, which is perfectly fine, I would idle, a lot of it, and make sure your map is accurate. And if your map's accurate, let her eat. And I would just do not suggest to do what one of our really good friends, Mr. Drew Boggs, does, and that's if you see water, you can go.
If you can't see it, it can't hurt you.
There's a reason he carries 6 lower units in his back of his truck.
Drew Boggs, guys, is a regional hammer. He's fishing some MLF invitationals, and he will run some stuff in a bass boat that I wouldn't kayak through.
Yeah, that's not a good idea. And I'm fortunate. I've got worked up a little bit of a deal with precision sonar, but I really suggest everybody getting the leash, man.
There's absolutely no reason. Everybody's running $100,000 bass boat. We're putting $150 worth of gas in them every single day we're out there running. Guys, go buy a freaking leash.
Yeah. And that's I've been saying that for 5 years. I think it ought to be standard. I think it ought to be mandatory. That's what I didn't even know. I'm sitting here with a precision sonar shirt on, so I thought people would be like, "Oh, that's a sales pitch." But I'm telling you, man, that's I want Drew to get one so bad. I'm tempted to just buy him one because
yeah, guys, check them out. Precision Sonar's got them. Super simple. Takes 20 minutes to install on your boat. I do them all myself. Like,
even I can put one on, and I don't know how to do anything but turn the key and push the gas.
All right, let's talk really quick. Anytime you go somewhere, even if you buy all your tackle online, which most people do now, there's got to be some pretty good tackle stores up through here. Give me a few from Kentucky Lake to Guntersville, Chickamauga area that you've been to. Waterfront's really good at Guntersville.
Yeah, there's really only one I can talk about. That's Harpeth River Outfitters in Pegram, Tennessee, man. They're he's got everything you could possibly need. He's got a brick and mortar store, and he's also online. Obviously, if you get in a pinch, there's some good stores around the TVA. But I better just talk about it.
Yeah, Harpeth River's got some great stuff, and they're, probably an hour from Kentucky Lake, something like that.
Yeah,
somewhere in that neighborhood.
He's starting to build a pretty good online presence too. But,
anything else that you can think about that a man would need to know? Coming to the Tennessee River. Here's a good one for you. What is in a single day event, I know it varies depending on a bunch of different factors, but in March, typically end to end, what's it going to take to win and what's it going to take to get paid?
I still feel, you say a 1-day event?
1-day event.
I feel like, and yeah, that's kind of tough to average it out. Kentucky Lake chick, they're still, I think 15 pounds a day is a good day.
For a check weight?
Yeah. It's going to take 20, 22, 25, somewhere in there to win. I know that's a big difference. The way Pickwick is right now, it's harder to catch 5 that weigh under 20 than it is to catch 5 that weigh 25. And that probably doesn't make sense to people that aren't familiar, but
it just don't have a lot of little ones in it right now.
Right. It's just got it's got big ones, and they're getting hammered and they're super hard to catch. I got a feeling people are going to see the weights from the Toyota last week and be planning a trip to come here. And I'm glad, for the city of Florence and everything. I'm not trying to knock them, but there's going to be some disappointed folks when they get down here, because they are hard to find and get. And when you find a couple, my buddy Tristan McCormick caught a 6.5 pound smallmouth in practice the other day. He FaceTimed me and it had a Sakamata shad broke off in its throat. And this thing's out in the middle of nowhere on a bar, just on a stump out by itself. And it's like, man, poor thing, like how many minutes have been thrown at these things. But
tis the game now.
Look at it like a trophy hunt. Pickwick is a great place to come right now, because it may be one of them deals you get 1 or 2 bites, but you may catch your PB both times.
Right.
Really similar to Kentucky Lake in 2018, when I remember doing a guide trip in March and we had 36.5, and on our best 5, of course, the customer was thrilled. And the whole time I'm up there like, man, something's not right. I was pulling up on places that for 10 years in a row, there had been a school of 2.5 pounders and we catch like 2 7s. And I'm like, something's just not right. And then that was pretty much the last, Kentucky Lake went dead for about 4 or 5 years after that. So I'm really getting those kind of vibes down here right now.
I really hate that. Pickwick's had a lot of pressure on it, and I mean, it's a phenomenal fishery, obviously. But, like you said, it's just all these lakes kind of go in cycles, I feel like.
They do.
Maybe other than Guntersville. It's,
you get Ed Geddes on here, who's fished Guntersville since 1980, and he'll even tell you that it's been through cycles. I think because of it not having a drawdown helps it keep vegetation, and its cycles aren't as
drastic
as the others.
Kentucky Lake's fishing phenomenally right now. Smallmouth have exploded. I think that's probably in part to some zebra mussels cleaning up the water a little bit, and those things are going ballistic. Throughout the system, really quickly here, as far as species go on the Tennessee River, there's largemouth, smallmouth, and spots. But can you ever play with spots, or they go, if you're catching a bunch of spots, you might as well go somewhere else because you can't compete with them.
This kind of breaks up our pre-spawn discussion, but the Toyota Championship was on Guntersville a couple falls ago, and there was only a couple of mats of hydrilla, man, and I wouldn't get enough at the scoping thing to go play with those guys, and I was dang sure not going to do circles around these 2 mats of hydrilla. So I ran up the river. I had never been up there. I'm talking like up the river, almost to Tennessee, which was our cutoff. And my co-angler had like 16.5 of spots one day, which obviously in the spring, that's not real strong of a stringer on a TVA, but in the fall, that's a really good stringer. But, he had 2 like over 3.5 pounds. But Guntersville's got some good ones. I was talking to David Allen earlier, who guides on Pickwick, and he said they caught a couple 4.5s this past summer down here on Pickwick. I probably wouldn't target them, but there's a chance you might catch one mixed in with other species that you end up weighing in.
So largemouth, smallmouth do play on the Tennessee River, guys, for sure.
Yes.
There's some absolute Mondo 7s and 8s, and to me, they're completely different than the northern smallmouth you catch at St. Lawrence or somewhere else. But guys, Brent has won over $400,000 fishing. This is how he made his living for the last long time. And he's give you some juice, and you can take it to the bank. Is what you can do, Brent Anderson.
Take it to the bank, baby.
Take it to the bank. Guys, thank y'all so much. This is Take It to the Bank on Tennessee River in March. Y'all stay tuned. We'll get Brent back on, a little bit later. Brent, how can people look you up if they want to do a guide trip with you, and where are you going to be?
It looks like I move around a lot. I'm going to spend
He's a gypsy.
I'm the fishing gypsy, man. I'm going to spend most of the spring and early summer on Kentucky Lake this year, believe it or not. And then I'll head to the St. Lawrence River in mid-June and stay up there until September. But you can shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook at Brent Anderson Fishing. And if you want the time of your life, I know it's a long way, but you come see me on St. Lawrence.
I've not done that yet, but I'm going to make it a point to be there this year.
Yes, sir. We're going to do it.
All right, guys. Thank you all so much. And Brent, thank you. Gary, there's some tips from a Tennessee River hammer, and you can take it to the bank.
I love it.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank.